Ghosts is a 1996 short film / music video by Michael Jackson. The journey to crafting this project is as intriguing and complex as the man himself. This ambitious project, which sought to recapture the magic of Jackson's iconic Thriller, brought together an extraordinary team of creative minds. However, the path was far from smooth, marked by unexpected twists, broken deals with major Hollywood players, betrayal, and a direct connection to the Addams family. Moreover, it's a passion project that was so deeply personal to Jackson, peeling back layers of his own persona, as well as firing back at his critics. Y'all, this is a wild story, so you want to stick around to the end. But before we get into it, we need some context, so we need to travel back in time. Jackson was at the very height of his popularity in the 1980s, and by the early 90s, he was already entering the phase that would be mythologizing himself while also securing his legacy. Jackson's team was brilliant at keeping the King of Pop on the radar, including several notable live appearances and playing at the Super Bowl, and it just cannot be overstated how this is considered to this day to be one of the greatest Super Bowl halftime shows of all time, edged out only by Prince. Meanwhile, in Hollywood, Paramount was taking a gamble on bringing back from the dead an old IP. The first live-action Addams Family was a hit 1960s show, and with instant brand recognition, the studio was hot to make it into a feature film. Directed by Men in Black's Barry Sonnenfeld, The Addams Family was released November 22nd, 1999, and made on a budget of only $30 million. It was a monster hit at the box office, scaring up almost $200 million at the box office, not to mention money from home video sales, rentals, video games, various tie-ins, including a soundtrack that featured MC Hammer at the very height of his fame. Speaking of, film soundtracks have been around for a long time, but by the 1990s, they were seen as much marketing tools as, say, trailers or radio spots. Sonnenfeld knew that the Addams sequel needed a huge name to do an original song. And what better person than the absolute king of pop? At this time, Jackson had a multi-platinum record, Dangerous, which included hit songs like Black and White. In his book, Barry Sonnenfeld described a strange day when he and producer Scott Rudin planned to meet Jackson at Neverland Ranch to screen a rough cut of Addams Family Values, with hopes to secure a deal for a tie-in song and music video. It took nearly 3 hours to drive from LA to Neverland Ranch, but the duo hoped it would be worth it. Right off the bat, Rudin and Sonnenfeld were left to wait for Jackson in his sprawling screening room. He details this event by saying, "We were shown into Michael's screening room, which had a certain vibe. It was huge, probably had 50 seats. The giant red velvet draped screen was flanked on either side by 10-foot tall replicas of the Oscar statues. The control panel where Michael could dim the lights, run the film, and talk to the projection booth featured a dot matrix panel that scrolled Michael Jackson, #1 King of Pop, in a continuous loop, reminding Michael who he was. Against the back of the wall on either side of the theater were bedrooms, each with a large single panel window providing an expansive view of the screen. Each bedroom had a round king-size bed, side tables, lamps, and layers of decorative pillows. Each had its own sound system and intercom to a projection booth. Both also had drapes. That's all I'm saying." Sonnenfeld and Rudin were left in the dark, massive theater. To keep from being bored, the director and producer were able to visit Neverland Park, and Sonnenfeld describes riding the merry-go-round with Rudin coyly hiding a smile. More time had passed, and the powerful Hollywood men were served peanut M&Ms and Kit Kats under a silver dome tray. It was then that they learned Jackson was in London and could be another 2 or 3 hours. Finally, Jackson had arrived and never acknowledged or even apologized for his lateness. To make matters even more uncomfortable, Jackson seemingly didn't have much of an attention span, as he didn't watch much of the early cut of Addams Family Values. However, to Rudin and Sonnenfeld's amazement and surprise, Jackson agreed to the deal, so it seemed like the long day at Neverland Ranch was worth it. Paramount would surely have a smash hit almost guaranteed now. So here's where things get really interesting. Jackson, in an attempt to outdo Thriller, wanted the undisputed king of horror. Enter Stephen King. Jackson was already a big fan of the horror master's work and sought him out specifically. As detailed by King himself in the podcast Think Twice, Michael Jackson, the author talks candidly about how he got involved with the project. At the time, King was on set during the filming of the TV miniseries The Stand. King recounts a funny story about how the King of Pop got in touch with him. King's wife Tabitha called her husband exclaiming that Michael Jackson, of all people, was trying to get a hold of him. He said, quote, she had given Michael the number of the production office in Colorado, and Michael didn't have a pen or a pencil. He called back a few minutes later saying, I'm sorry, I tried writing the number in the carpet, but I can't read what I wrote. Now I have a paper and pencil, can you give me the number and I'll write it down, end quote. King had been offered by other celebrities to pitch him ideas, but the master of horror never really jumped on any of them until now, as he found the core concept Jackson had pitched him to be really interesting. Not to mention, King was already a huge fan of the pop icon. The story Michael pitched him was a man living alone in a mansion where the townspeople wanted him cast out, yet the children see something innocent and pure about him. Thematically, this is very much in King's wheelhouse, such as the power and destruction fear can have on a small town, not to mention the power of the innocence of kids. Quote, he made a point to say that the kids liked him. It was a way of him saying, look, I am what I am and the kids like it. You don't understand what I'm doing at all. He said the people in the town felt that this person on the hill was weird and strange and scary, and the kids are kind of like, yeah, we sort of dig this guy. What he wanted to say was strange isn't bad, and people who think strange is bad are expressing a kind of herd mentality, a mob mentality, end quote. To sweeten the deal, King wanted Jackson to voice a character in an audiobook, though in the podcast, King wasn't able to recall which book this would have been. Though it didn't matter, as despite King working on the project with Jackson, the pop icon never actually did the audiobook. This was due reportedly because he did not want to read the profanity out loud, most likely due to his strict upbringing. Like something out of a 30s Universal horror movie, the short opens with the townspeople with torches storming this creepy looking mansion. We see that there are some kids being dragged along. The kids try to tell their parents that the man who lives inside isn't bad, yet this doesn't deter the mob. Once outside his door, Jackson's unnamed character greets the visitors whilst also endearing the children. The group eventually come inside, where Jackson proceeds to make silly faces, then scary ones, and a battle of wits between he and the townspeople ensues. Something happens, we don't know because the footage wasn't finished, but we see Jackson is smashed into dust and laying on the ground. The adults are stunned but slowly walk away. However, the kids lovingly put Jackson back together, and this revives him. As the kids exit, we see Wednesday and Pugsley asking if the kids want to stay and play with them. Obviously, a lot of this is Jackson working out how adults thought he was a weirdo and how kids saw him in the complete opposite light. The project seemed to be fitting into place as the story was written, and filming began in August of 1993. This meant that Jackson was also doing rehearsals for his upcoming Dangerous tour. Over the years, extras have come out and talked about the filming of this. I got a chance to sit down with Troy Evans, who was an extra. What was it called when you were hired? Because in the essay, I call it "Is It Scary?" and that's kind of what it's been unofficially maybe labeled.
Right. I don't think it was actually titled.
Okay.
And I believe what it was intended to be was a teaser at the beginning of the Addams Family movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a bonus they were going to add on the movie. And the guy who was directing the movie had directed The Stand. And I had a little part in that, and he liked me. And so he called me and he said, this isn't, it's really almost extra work, but if you want to do this thing, I'd consider it a favor if you do this thing with Michael Jackson. So I said, sure. Hell yeah. and it turned out to be a pretty interesting day, actually.
Yeah, and I remember I think it was on a podcast you were talking about how it was very secretive, right? Like you
Oh,
couldn't leave.
extremely. And now, do you know what year it was? I don't remember what year it was
91, 92.
because I know that some of us had cell phones. That was near the
Mm.
beginning of cell phones, but those were all taken. We couldn't bring them on the set.
Oh, wow.
No phones allowed on the set,
Mm.
and uh, and we had to sign all kinds of disclaimers and stuff like that. And then when we came to work in the morning, then you couldn't leave during the day. Usually, if you're not working that part of the scene, you can wander around a lot or go to lunch. But everything, we were locked in there.
Mm.
So it was, yeah.
That's interesting. So do you recall how many days you were shooting this?
Uh, I think it was just one day.
Hmm.
It might have been two.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure it was one day. And I think you probably know the punchline on this is we went in and did the whole day, and it all had to do with this town being terrified of this strange guy who'd moved into the weird old house in town, and they didn't want him around their children. And then at the end of the day, when we left, we hadn't heard any news, we had no contact of any kind. When we were released and left in the evening, that was the day all the charges had dropped
Hmm.
against uh, Michael up in Santa Barbara. So we're doing this fantasy version of that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the real thing is happening out outside. So we went home that night, and then we never heard. And it was like, the AD called or something. Yeah, we're not working tomorrow. We'll let you know. And then that was the end of that.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad you brought that up because it must feel very surreal, right? Like you were saying, kind of almost like I mean, because um, you know, Michael was at the height of his power. He could have written anything. So this almost like allegory was kind of interesting, especially the timing.
oh yeah, and it was uh, like what I remember vividly is it's a uh, takeoff on the old 30s monster movies and stuff. The townspeople out with the torches out of our town, and we come down and we're yelling, "Get out of our town! Get out of our town!" And Michael comes out on the porch and says, "Why don't you like me? You're too weird. You're weird." And then somebody yells, "You're scary. You're just scary." And he comes down the stairs and picks up like a 4-year-old boy
Hmm.
and says, "Do you think I'm scary?" And which in it's a pretty weird moment in the
Yeah.
and the other thing that's burned in my memory is they kept me there. Uh, at the end of the day, they let everybody else go, and it was just the crew and the director and Michael, and they had me doing the off camera for the whole mob during Michael's close-ups.
Hmm.
And so it was my job to just be on the other side of the camera and just scream abuse at him, and he was dealing with it. And what I'm 99% sure was going on is that he made a choice in his mind that he wanted me to call him the word that people don't say anymore.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that would be his trigger to have a very sad reaction to it. Legitimate choice. But I wasn't going to say that. I can't do it. And so, but I'm just screaming shit at him. And also, uh, he didn't speak to me. He was so quiet. He's talking a little whisper, and he had a guy with him, and he'd turn. We'd finish a take, and he'd turn to the guy next to him, and he'd talk to that guy, and then that guy would go around like a game of telephone. About six guys, and would come around to me, and the same thing kept going. No, 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 really insult him. He wants you to really insult him.
Mm.
And one of the times it sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
But I screamed at him, "You fucking bleached freak, stay away from my son." And they said, "Cut, cut, cut." And I thought maybe I was going to be kicked out then. And instead they came around and said, "No, no, really insult him."
Wow.
"You fucking bleached freak" doesn't count as an insult. It's like, oh, and then I'm just standing there, and it's kind of a weird thing. And I've been with it in that with other stars too, where you're there, you're working together, but they don't actually recognize you as a human. So when the camera isn't rolling, they're dealing with their entourage, and you're alone.
Yeah,
which is fine. I used to bother me, and now they're not paid to entertain me.
Yeah.
And not everybody's like that, but a certain number of people are. But I'm just standing there, and then I heard this little voice going, "Sir, sir, sir," and I realized it was Michael. And I looked over. He said, "Sir, could you give me one of these?" Well, and it wasn't a full,
yeah.
kind of a suggestion of he like the word I didn't want to say. He couldn't quite give me the full finger, but a little, this one.
Yeah.
So I said, "Yeah, sure, I could do that." And so eventually we got through it, and then I got out to the car and
It was just like,
got
wow, this is weird.
I mean, can you imagine going through that day, and then you go out and on the radio you hear, because the radio was just and they, I don't know, maybe they still do this. I don't hear it anymore, but they used to have KFWB news. It was news all day, and boy, that was on. And I would listen to that because that's where you get the traffic too. And you need it. Do you know? One of the best things about living in LA, if you live in LA and you want to go to LA, it only takes you 2 hours.
I'm trying to like envision that, and I mean, even before like the charges were announced, even in that situation, it must have been so weird / maybe surreal.
Yeah, yeah. Although it didn't it didn't have a heavy impact because you know uh, in the movie business they take all these little pieces and they put it together, and when you see it there's a whole different impact than you're doing your little piece, and then when you see it all folded together in the whole movie, it's a different thing. It's like the cherry in the cherry pie is different than just popping the cherry in your mouth.
Yeah.
Does that make? I don't know if that makes
Oh
sense.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay. So that wasn't
so it didn't seem particularly weird, although it I think everybody was aware that they were in the presence of a really big time talent, super talented guy. So I don't know if there's a bigger celebrity at that time than him, and so and all the super weirdness of it. It kind of grew through the day, but it wasn't really clear until after I left.
Yeah.
This is fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, so you what I and this is also what I read was like you never got the official this is canceled. It was just like it just kind of just flatlined, right?
Right. Yeah. They sent a check and
Yeah, that was that.
not a large check.
Had you ever been in a situation where like somebody like that was maybe trying to be method and wanted you to kind of get a rise out of them, kind of like in that situation, or is that something sort of unique to this?
Oh, this was the most extreme. I
Uh,
mean, that's very, very common in acting situations where people come from different schools,
hmm,
you know, um, uh, that their whole idea of how the process works is different. Now, mine uh, is very similar to what we're doing right now. I sit down and talk to the person and and when we do the scene and do the scene and
yeah,
then but I fully understand some people don't want to do that. They don't want to talk about what's on the lunch menu while we're doing this.
yeah,
To each his own.
yeah. No, that's I mean, and I find it really fascinating because, like, obviously, I never met Michael Jackson. I'm not a psychologist, but it almost felt like a little bit of like self-punishment, like really wanting him to or wanting you to really go in on him. Like, did it kind of feel like that a little bit?
Oh,
Or
I never thought about that until you said it. But uh, yeah, there's a whole world there that's hard to
yeah, yeah,
comprehend.
yeah,
Jane Morris, who also played a townsfolk, recounted her take on the material, saying, quote, "It's kind of like a Boo Radley character, right? And so the townspeople form a mob to protect their children from this scary man in the castle. And I believe in the end, we're all convinced that he's not scary. I don't know how it ended. We never got that far," end quote. One day, just 12 days into filming, the news broke that Jackson was officially being accused of SA of a child. The actors never got the official news that the shoot was canceled, but the writing was very much on the wall. Some reports state that Michael abandoned the project, yet according to the Think Twice podcast, it paints us in a very different picture. While Paramount has never officially stated that they pulled the plug because of the accusations, it's kind of a no-brainer. The podcaster rightly points out the incredible irony that the passion project Michael Jackson wanted to make and even helped write was about being accused of doing something scary to kids. Now, keep in mind, this was well into shooting when the first accusations happened. So think about it. Jackson could have pretty much made anything he wanted at this time, but there is something really chilling about how art was imitating life. While it didn't make as much as the first, Addams Family Value was another hit, making over $100 million on a $47 million budget. So if you ever wonder why in Addams Family Values there's a very spicy Michael Jackson joke, it's because of this situation. Whether or not you feel this was a petty swipe is up to you, but regardless, Is It Scary was DOA. However, like the zombies in Thriller, Is It Scary would rise again from the grave, but as something completely different. Is It Scary was all but a hazy memory until using the same script written by Mick Garris and Jackson with a story by Stephen King, it would be revamped into Ghosts. Despite Is It Scary being tied to a very painful time in Jackson's life, he clearly wanted to tell this story. Also, it just so happened that this would be the perfect promotional tool for his upcoming project, History, which would be a kind of greatest hits compilation as well as new material. Amazingly, Ghosts would be self-funded by Jackson. Garris, who was a driving force on Is It Scary, talked candidly about the budget, saying, "It was a very large transformation over the course of it and eventually became by far the most expensive music video ever made. We shot for 2 weeks and never got into the music video part because when you work Michael hours, they're not the same as regular hours. By the time everything shut down, we'd spent $7 million. It ended up up coming in at about 15 million, all of it out of Michael's pocket. It just became this 35-minute, what do you call it? It's not really a short, it's not a music video, but it's something unique, end quote. The notion that this was self-funded to a tune of 15 million is staggering, especially when you consider that this short film slash music video costs more than some feature films do, even today. I obviously can only speculate as to why this project meant so much to Jackson, but it's crystal clear that he was going to will it into existence, and that is exactly what he did. Using the script from Is This Scary, the final screenwriting credit would go to Mick Garris and Stan Winston. Winston was an absolute legend of the special effects world, and his work is so iconic that it would be incredibly hard for anybody to not be familiar with it. Russell Carpenter was hired as DP. The Oscar-winning cameraman is best known for working with James Cameron starting from True Lies all the way up to the Avatar films. Originally, Mick Garris, known for his work with Stephen King adaptations like The Stand and having a hand in Hocus Pocus as well as directing Critters 2, was set to direct Ghosts as well as co-writing. However, the film's production faced a significant change in direction due to scheduling conflicts. Given his unavailability, Garris recommended Stan Winston, a renowned special effects artist who had directed one other time on the cult film Pumpkinhead. Winston was well versed in creating compelling visual effects, making him the ideal candidate to bring this fantastical world to life. Michael Jackson reached out to Winston personally, extending an invitation to direct the film. Winston agreed, setting forth one intriguing condition: Michael Jackson had to portray all the lead roles. This condition was a testament to Winston's belief in Jackson's versatility and ability to embody multiple characters, which ultimately contribute to the film's unique storytelling style. On Stan Winston's official site, the behind-the-scenes work has been thankfully documented. Winston states, quote, "I wanted Michael to play the haunted house guy, but also the mayor of the town and an evil demon who comes in at one point. Michael wanted badly to be accepted as an actor, as something more than just the king of pop, but it was so difficult for people to get past Michael's persona. I thought that the only way he would be accepted as a real actor was if he played all these parts disguised in makeup, so that no one knew it was him until the end." And he was very agreeable to that idea. And indeed, Jackson played all 5 main characters. In addition to playing the man in the mansion, he also played the mayor, the maestro, the skeleton, the super ghoul, and a ghoul version of the mayor. Ghost originally was planned as only to be 12 to 14 minutes long. However, the runtime actually ballooned to close to 40 minutes, which actually placed the music video in the 2002 Guinness Book of World Records for the longest music video. This would later be dethroned by the video for Happy, which lasts a whopping 24 hours. The entire filming process took over 6 weeks and employed, at the time, cutting-edge special effects and practical makeup that still looks damn good decades later. Ghost was screened at Cannes in 1997 and was released Laserdisc, VHS, and video CD. To date, there has never been an official DVD or Blu-ray. Ghost is a project that is kind of wild how it's not very well known, considering it has attached to it some of the greatest names in horror and makeup effects. Nathan Rabin of the AV Club dismissed the project as, quote, "a staggering, blunt allegory for Jackson's life and pop culture status," and while everybody's certainly entitled to their own opinion, it kind of dismisses the incredible achievement that is Ghost. Because if you watch this video, which can be found online, just Google it, everyone working on this project is really at the height of their respected fields. Sure, it may be very on the nose, but at the same time, it was a deeply personal project that Jackson wanted out there so badly he ponied up $15 million of his own money. However you feel about Jackson and his legacy, the story on how this project got made, I think is really entertaining, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. I have to say that the research for this was incredibly tricky because Is It Scary and Ghosts are almost total remakes of one another, so the reporting does get a little bit confusing at times, but I do think that this is a timeline that makes a lot of sense. All my sources are provided in the description. I try to be as careful as I can to only give you information that is verified. I mentioned this before, but Barry Sonnenfeld's book was a huge help, and again, I think it's totally worth checking out in audiobook form. So please weigh in the comments. Let me know what you think of this project. Are you a big fan of Michael Jackson? What your favorite song of his is? And thanks for hanging out with me. And while you're at it, please check out some of these videos, and I will see y'all in the next one.